In a community marked by scarcity, a girl learns to value even the little she has. With the arrival of Easter, she struggles to get a simple chocolate to surprise her mother. But on the way back, an unexpected encounter puts her effort and her heart to the test. The decision she makes at that moment begins a transformation greater than anyone imagined. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you are watching us from. Continuing. The afternoon sun entered through the curtainless window of the small room that Luisa shared with her mother, illuminating the peeling walls and the burnt cement floor that Conceição kept impeccably clean. Outside, the voices of the Nordeste de Amaralina community mixed with the distant sound of the sea, creating that familiar soundtrack that lulled the days of those who lived there in the heart of Salvador. Luisa was sitting on the edge of the bed, her bare feet swinging in the air as she watched her mother fold clothes she had ironed for the madams of the upscale neighborhood. Conceição worked every day, from 6 in the morning until 9 at night, moving between the community where they lived and the large houses of Vitoria, carrying with her only a worn-out bag and a tired smile that never completely disappeared. The girl was 12 years old, but her eyes carried an understanding of the world that went far beyond her age. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was a kind of silent wisdom, built day after day by observing her mother struggle to ensure that rice and beans were never missing from the table, even if sometimes everything else was missing. That week, however, there was something different in the air. Easter was approaching, and with it came that smell of chocolate that invaded the streets, the shop windows, and the conversations of the other children at school. Luisa had never asked her mother for anything. She had learned early on that wishing for the impossible only made life heavier, and Conceição already carried too much weight on her shoulders. But that year, for the first time, a stubborn thought would not leave her head. She wanted to get a chocolate, a single chocolate. Not for herself, but to share with her mother. She wanted to see Conceição's face light up, even if only for an instant. She wanted to give back in some way all the daily sacrifice of that woman who never complained, who never cried in front of her daughter, who woke up before the sun and returned after the moon. For days, Luisa looked for opportunities. She helped Donna Marilene, the downstairs neighbor, carry groceries up the stairs. She organized the shop for Sir Joachim, who had trembling hands and always left the shelves crooked. She swept the church sidewalk 3 times in a row, even without anyone asking. Each small gesture earned a few coins, change that she kept in a small jar hidden under the bed, counting and recounting at night, calculating when she would finally have enough. Conceição noticed everything, of course. A mother always notices. But she said nothing. She just watched from afar, with that mixture of pride and pain that only a mother can understand. Seeing her daughter fight for such a small, simple dream simultaneously filled her with admiration and broke her heart. On the Saturday before Easter, Luisa finally counted the coins for the last time. She had enough. Her heart beat faster in her chest when she realized that the impossible had become possible. She had made it. She put the coins in the pocket of the flowered dress that Conceição had sewn with scraps, put on her mended sandals, and headed towards São Geraldo's little market, 3 streets down. The path was as familiar to her as the palm of her hand. She passed the house of Donna Noza, who was watering plants on the sidewalk, and waved to her with a toothless smile. She crossed the small square where the boys played soccer with a deflated ball. She greeted São Manuel, the popcorn man, who always saved the burnt popcorn to give for free to the children of the community. When she entered the market, the smell of laundry detergent mixed with ripe fruit welcomed her. São Geraldo was at the register, with his glasses crooked on his nose, organizing bills. "Good morning, São Geraldo," Luisa said in the soft voice that won everyone over. "Miss Luisa," the gentleman replied, adjusting his glasses. "What brings you here today?" She placed the coins on the counter one by one carefully. "I wanted to buy a chocolate, São Geraldo, one of those for Easter. Is there one I can buy with this?" The man looked at the coins, then at the girl's hopeful face, and his heart softened. "Of course there is, girl. I'll get a very beautiful one for you." He returned with a small chocolate, but wrapped in shiny red and gold paper. To Luisa, that was a treasure. Her eyes shone as she held the package in her hands, feeling the weight, imagining her mother's smile when she saw it. "It's for your mother, isn't it?" Seu Geraldo asked, already knowing the answer. Luisa nodded, pressing the chocolate against her chest. "She works so hard, Seu Geraldo. I wanted to give her some joy." The old merchant felt a lump in his throat. "Your mother is a woman of grit, Luisa, and you are just like her. Go, girl, take this chocolate and make your mother happy." Luisa left the market with a light heart and feet almost dancing on the hot asphalt. She held the chocolate with both hands as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And at that moment, for her, it was. It represented days of effort, nights of planning, the materialization of a dream that had seemed impossible. The sun was already beginning to descend on the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink. Luisa decided to take the long way back, wanting to prolong that moment of happiness. She passed by the Bonfim slope, where some women talked in the doorways of their houses. She crossed the street of the mango trees, where children played hide-and-seek. It was when she turned the corner of Cajuero Street that she saw it. A figure was sitting on the sidewalk, leaning against the peeling wall of an abandoned house. It was an elderly woman, thin to the point of appearing fragile, with clothes so worn they could barely be distinguished from the color of the cement. Her eyes were closed, and she breathed slowly as if every movement cost an immense effort. Beside her there was nothing. Not a bag, not a purse. Nothing. Luisa stopped. Her heart, which had been beating lightly seconds ago, now weighed heavy in her chest. She looked at the chocolate in her hands. She looked at the woman. She looked at the chocolate again. She thought of her mother. She thought of the silent promise she had made to herself. She thought of all the days she had gathered those coins, the effort, the expectation. She thought of what it would be like to see Conceição's smile upon receiving that gift. But she couldn't take her eyes off the woman. Something inside her locked up. A silent battle was unfolding in her chest. It was just a chocolate, it was just a gesture, but it was everything she had. It was days of work. It was love materialized. It was the only thing she could take home. Luisa's hands trembled. She took a step forward, then stopped. She took another step, then stopped again. The voice of reason in her head screamed to move on, to protect what was rightfully hers, what she had earned with sweat. But there was another voice. Lower. Deeper. A voice that sounded strangely like her mother's, saying words that Conceição always repeated. Those who have little and share have much. Those who have much and keep it have nothing. Luisa took a deep breath. Her hands stopped trembling. And then, before she could change her mind, before reason could win that internal battle, she walked over to the woman. The lady was startled when she saw the girl approach. Her tired eyes opened, revealing a sea of untold stories, of unshared pains. Luisa held out the chocolate. "Here, ma'am, for you." The woman looked at the shiny package, then at the girl's face. "Girl, I can't accept this. It's yours." "I want you to have it," Luisa insisted, placing the chocolate in the woman's trembling hands. "Please." Tears began to roll down the lady's wrinkled face. She held the chocolate as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and at that moment, for her, it was. "God bless you, girl, God bless you." Luisa smiled, even while feeling a tightness in her chest. She turned and began to walk back home. Her hands were empty now. There was nothing left to take to her mother. There was no longer that gift she had dreamed so much of giving. But strangely, something inside her was different. It wasn't happiness exactly. It wasn't sadness either. It was something in between, something she couldn't name. A feeling that she had done something important, even without fully understanding why. As she climbed the slope back home, Luisa didn't know that her footsteps were not the only ones echoing that afternoon. From across the street, inside a black car with tinted windows, a man had witnessed the entire scene. Roberto Tavares was 46 years old, the owner of a successful construction company and a bank account that allowed for any luxury. He was there in that community because he had plans. Big plans, lucrative plans, plans that would transform that place into something completely different. But what he had just witnessed had cracked something inside him, something he didn't even know still existed. And as he watched the girl disappear up the slope, empty-handed but with firm steps, Roberto Tavares felt for the first time in decades something he couldn't name. Something dangerously similar to shame, Roberto Tavares remained inside the car for long minutes after Luisa disappeared from sight. His hands still gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white from tension. The icy air conditioning contrasted with the heat he felt in his chest, an uncomfortable sensation he could neither name nor push away. He had come to that community with a clear and direct objective. His construction company, Tavares Empreendimentos, had ambitious plans for that area, plans that involved big numbers, guaranteed returns, and a total transformation of the territory. In recent months, he and his team had studied every square meter of that place, calculated costs, projected profits, and traced strategies. To Roberto, it had never been more than a project. Lines on a paper, numbers on a spreadsheet, a lucrative investment in a region that, according to his analysts, had untapped potential. The people who lived there were just statistical data, obstacles to be negotiated, variables to be considered, until that moment, until he saw a 12-year-old girl give her only chocolate to a complete stranger. Roberto closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The scene kept repeating in his mind like a movie on a loop, the girl's small hands holding the shiny package, the hesitation, the internal battle visible in every movement. And then the decision, the delivery, the gesture that defied all logic of survival. He tried to rationalize it. He tried to find an explanation that made sense within the world he knew. Maybe the girl knew the woman. Maybe she expected something in return. Maybe it was naivety, immaturity, a lack of understanding of the real value of things. But deep down, Roberto knew none of that was true. He had seen the struggle on the girl's face. He had perceived the weight of that decision. And it bothered him deeply because even though he had more money than he could spend in several lifetimes, he knew he wouldn't be capable of doing the same. That realization was like a punch to the stomach. Roberto started the car and drove in silence to his apartment in Barra, a triplex with an ocean view that had cost more than 3 million reais. He entered, threw his keys on the imported marble counter, and poured himself a 40-year-old whiskey. He sat on the Italian leather sofa, looking at the panoramic view of Salvador, and wondered when, exactly, he had become the kind of man incapable of a simple gesture of generosity. That night, Roberto couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his king-size bed, turned on the television, turned it off, picked up his phone, put it down. Nothing worked. The image of the girl wouldn't leave his head. The next day he made a decision that his partners would never understand. He needed to get to know that place for real, not through the eyes of a businessman calculating profits, but through the eyes of someone willing to see what he had always chosen to ignore. He dressed in simple clothes, left his imported car in the garage and took a taxi to Nordeste de Amaralina. When he got out at the entrance of the community, he immediately felt out of place. His pristine white sneakers, his discreet brand-name polo shirt, everything about him screamed that he didn't belong there. But Roberto moved forward. He walked through the narrow streets, observing what he had previously seen only as numbers in a report. He saw children playing with improvised toys. He saw women washing clothes in basins on the sidewalk. He saw men fixing old cars with rusty tools. He saw life happening despite the difficulties, not because of them. He stopped at a small bar, ordered a coconut water, and began talking to the owner, a grey-haired man named Moachir. The conversation was cautious at first, but gradually it loosened up. Roberto asked, and Moachir answered. About the community, about the people, about the daily challenges. It was then that Roberto asked the question that would change everything. Those houses up there in the upper part, some have already been vacated, haven't they? Moachir turned serious. Yes, they were about 5 years ago. They said the structure was compromised, that it was a risk area. They promised resettlement. Some families received it, others didn't. A lot of people were left with nowhere to go. Roberto felt a chill down his spine. And who was responsible for the work? The big construction company. I don't remember the name exactly now, but it was one of those with a family name. Roberto didn't need to ask anything else. He knew exactly which construction company it was. His own. It had been one of the first major projects when he took over the company from his recently deceased father. At the time, he was so focused on proving his worth, on showing that he was worthy of leading the family business, that he didn't question the methods. He just signed what was put in front of him, approved what the lawyers recommended, and executed what the engineers designed. He had never thought about the people, about the families, about the lives that were displaced, fragmented, forgotten. "Thank you for the conversation, monsieur," Roberto said, leaving money on the table far beyond the value of the coconut water. When he left the bar, his legs were trembling. He walked aimlessly through the alleys, processing that devastating information. He wasn't just an outside observer of that place, he was part of the problem. His decisions, or lack thereof, had contributed to the situation he saw now. It was then that he saw her again. Luisa was helping an elderly lady carry grocery bags up the stairs. Her thin arms held the weight with difficulty, but her face showed determination. She was laughing at something the lady said, and that crystal-clear sound echoed through the street. Roberto stood still, watching. He felt that uncomfortable sensation in his chest again, pain, admiration, shame, all mixed in a whirlwind he couldn't process. At that moment he made another decision. He was going to fix this. He was going to use his resources, his influence, his money to transform that community. Not in the way he had planned, erasing everything to build something new, but by improving what already existed, respecting the people, correcting the mistakes of the past. It seemed simple, it seemed noble, it seemed right. Roberto had no idea of the chaos he was about to unleash. In the following days he began to act. Discreetly at first. He hired a company to fix the most damaged roofs. He paid for the main street to be paved. He donated school supplies to the local school. He funded the renovation of the health clinic. Everything was done through third parties, without anyone knowing it was him. Roberto thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was helping without creating dependency, without drawing attention, without expecting recognition. But the community began to notice the changes. And with the changes came questions. Who was behind it? Why? What was the real interest? What would they come to collect later? People are not naive when they live in a state of vulnerability. They learn early on that nothing is free, that every help has a price, that every kindness hides an intention. And so instead of gratitude, suspicion grew. Conceição was one of the first to express concern. At a meeting of the Residents' Association, she raised her voice. "People, we need to find out who is doing this, because nobody spends money like this without wanting anything in return, and when the bill arrives, we might not be able to pay it." Others agreed. Some disagreed, saying they should just accept the luck while it lasted. The community began to divide. Roberto followed everything from a distance, not understanding why his attempt to help was creating more problems. He talked to businessman friends, who laughed at the situation. "You're getting soft, Roberto. These people don't know what's good for them. Want to really help? Buy it all, resettle them somewhere better, and build what you planned. Profit for you, benefit for them. Everyone wins." But Roberto could no longer see things that way. The image of Luisa giving the chocolate would not leave him. That gesture had awakened something in him that had been dormant for decades. A conscience, a humanity, a necessary discomfort. So he decided to reveal himself. He scheduled a meeting at the Residents' Association. When he entered the simple room with plastic chairs and peeling walls, all eyes turned to him. Roberto felt the weight of those gazes. They weren't hostile, but they weren't friendly either. They were cautious, suspicious, tired of empty promises, tired of empty. "Good evening," he began, his voice slightly trembling. "My name is Roberto Tavares, and I am the one who financed the improvements you have seen in the community." The silence that followed was heavy. Conceição was the first to speak. "And what is your interest in all this?" Roberto took a deep breath. "Before I answer your question, I need to confess something. My construction company was responsible for a project here 5 years ago, a project that displaced families and caused suffering. At the time, I wasn't attentive to the real impact of my decisions, but now I am, and I want to correct the mistakes of the past." The room exploded in murmurs. Some people stood up, outraged. Others remained seated, processing the information. "So you're trying to buy our conscience?" a male voice shouted from the back. "No," Roberto replied. "I'm trying to do what is right, but I realize now that I made another mistake. I should have come to talk to you before making any decisions. I should have asked what you need, instead of assuming I knew." "And why this change of heart now?" Conceição asked, her eyes fixed on him. Roberto hesitated. Because I saw something that made me question the kind of man I've become. I saw a gesture of generosity so pure, so genuine, that it made me realize how far I had moved away from any real sense of humanity. He didn't mention Louisa. He didn't want to expose her. But Conceição, who knew her daughter better than anyone, was already connecting the dots. The meeting ended without conclusions. Roberto left there with more questions than answers. But something had changed. The truth was exposed, and now he would have to deal with the consequences. As he walked back to his car, he didn't notice a small figure watching from afar. Louisa had heard everything, and for the first time since she had given the chocolate, she felt a weight in her chest that she couldn't understand. Her simple and invisible life was about to become much more complicated. The weeks following Roberto's revelation transformed Nordeste de Amaralina into a minefield of invisible tensions. The community that once united in difficulties now divided in opinions. On one side were those who saw Roberto's actions as a rare opportunity for improvement. Donna Marilene, the downstairs neighbor, argued that it didn't matter where the help came from. The important thing was that it existed. Her son had managed to get a scholarship for a technical course funded by the businessman. How could she refuse that? How could she deny her son a chance she never had? On the other side, people like Conceição saw a dangerous pattern. Help that comes from above is never free, she said in conversation circles. Today he fixes a roof. Tomorrow he says we owe him. And when the bill arrives, what are we going to pay with? With our dignity? With our home? In the middle of this division, like an emotional pendulum, was Louisa. The girl had noticed that something had changed in the way people looked at her. At first it was subtle, a silence when she entered a conversation circle, a side-eye that wasn't there before, whispered comments that stopped when she approached. But gradually the subtlety gave way to cruel clarity. It was Donna Nusa, the same one who used to water the plants and wave with a smile, who first verbalized what others thought in silence. Louisa was passing by the sidewalk when she heard the harsh voice call her. "Girl, come here for a moment." Louisa approached, her heart already tightening without knowing why. "Is it true that you knew this rich man before he showed up here?" "No, Donna Nusa. I had never seen him before." The woman narrowed her eyes. "Because everyone is saying you must have done something for him to want to help us like this. Nobody spends money for nothing, girl. There's always a reason." Louisa felt the ground open up beneath her feet. "I didn't do anything, Donna Nusa. I don't even know exactly who he is." Donna Nusa snorted. "Right. And that chocolate you gave to the old lady in the street. They say he was watching everything. Very convenient, don't you think?" The girl was speechless. Her hands began to tremble. That gesture, that moment that had been so pure, so genuine, was being distorted, transformed into something dirty, calculated, as if she, a 12-year-old girl, were capable of orchestrating emotional manipulation to attract a rich businessman. Conceição, who had heard everything from the window, came down the stairs like a hurricane. "Nusa, what exactly are you insinuating? That my 12-year-old daughter staged a scene to get the attention of a man she didn't even know existed?" Donna Nusa backed away, but not entirely. "Oh, Chaser, I'm not saying it was on purpose. I'm just saying it's a lot of coincidence." "Coincidence is life, Nusa. My daughter has a good heart, and if you can't see that, the problem isn't hers, it's yours." Conceição took Louisa by the hand and led her home. When they closed the door, the girl finally broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to understand how everything had turned into this. "Mum, I just wanted to help," she sobbed. "I didn't know anyone was watching. I didn't know anything." Conceição hugged her daughter tightly, feeling her own heart shatter. "I know, my daughter, I know people sometimes get blinded by so much suspicion. But you didn't do anything wrong. Do you hear me? Nothing." But her mother's words, as loving as they were, couldn't erase the pain. For the first time in her life, Louisa questioned if she had done the right thing. If it wouldn't have been better to keep that chocolate, take it home, give it to her mother as she had planned. If it wouldn't have been simpler to remain invisible, as she had always been. Meanwhile, Roberto faced his own battles. His partners had called an emergency meeting. When he entered the conference room of Tavares Empreendimentos, he found 5 men in suits, all with serious expressions. Roberto, we need to talk about this new philanthropic phase of yours, began Marcelo, the oldest partner. The board is concerned. Concerned about what? Roberto asked, already knowing the answer. With the direction you're taking the company. We're talking about a 20 million raise project that you simply shelved, and now you're spending personal money on a community that isn't even part of our strategic interests. Roberto took a deep breath. That community should be our interest, because we contributed to the problems it faces today. We have a responsibility. Responsibility, Marcelo almost shouted. Roberto, this is business. We buy, we build, we sell. We are not an NGO. We are not saviors. We are businessmen. And what if I want to be both? Then you're going to have to choose, another partner intervened, because this company was built with a logic, and you're breaking that logic. Roberto looked around the table. He saw men he had known for years, men with whom he had closed deals, celebrated victories, shared profits. But he also saw something he had never noticed before. He saw the absence of empathy, calculated coldness, absolute detachment from the human consequences of their decisions. I need some time to think, he said, standing up. We don't have time, Roberto. The market doesn't wait. Either you get back in the game or you get out of it. Roberto left the room without answering. His mind was a whirlwind. Part of him knew the partners were right from a business perspective. He was deviating from the path. He was mixing emotion with business. He was being, as Marcelo had once said, irrational. But every time he thought about going back, the image of Luisa giving the chocolate returned to his mind, and something inside him refused to accept that it meant nothing, that the gesture didn't matter, that he could simply move on as if he hadn't witnessed something deeply transformative. That night he went back to the community. He needed to understand what was happening. He needed to know if his actions were really helping or just creating more problems. It was then that he saw Luisa sitting alone on the step of the stairs that led to her house. She was hugging her knees, her face hidden in her arms. Even from a distance, Roberto could see she was crying. Something broke inside him. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. Luisa raised her face upon hearing footsteps, and her red eyes met his. "You're the man from the meeting," she said in a choked voice. "I am, Roberto, and you're the girl with the chocolate." Luisa stiffened. "How do you know?" I was there that day. I saw you give the chocolate to that lady." The girl stood up quickly, wiping away tears with anger. "It was because of you that everything got bad. People are saying I did that on purpose, that I knew you were watching, but I didn't know. I didn't know anything." Roberto felt an overwhelming guilt. "I know you didn't know, and I'm sorry. It was never my intention to cause problems for you. But you did," she said, her voice breaking. "Now everyone looks at me differently. They think I'm fake. They think I wanted something, and I just wanted to help. That's all." "That was exactly what I was trying to do too," Roberto admitted. "Help. But it seems I only made things worse." They stood in silence for a moment, two strangers joined by the same experience of seeing a gesture of kindness transformed into something turbulent. "Why did you do it?" Roberto asked. "Why did you give the chocolate?" Luisa thought for a moment. "Because she needed it more than I did, and because my mother always says that we are worth what we do when nobody is looking." Roberto felt those words hit the center of his chest. "Your mother is a wise woman." "She is, and now she's mad at you. She thinks you're trying to buy us." "I'm not," he said firmly. "I'm just trying to fix mistakes I made, but it seems every attempt to fix them creates a new mistake." "Then maybe you should stop trying to fix and start listening," Luisa said with a wisdom that went beyond her 12 years. Before Roberto could respond, Conceição's voice cut through the air. "Luisa, inside, now." The girl obeyed immediately, climbing the steps without looking back. Conceição came down to where Roberto was, her eyes flashing with controlled anger. "You have nerve, you know. Coming here, messing with our lives, and on top of that, approaching my daughter." "I wasn't approaching her. She was crying, and I just wanted to know if she was okay." "And she wouldn't be crying if it weren't for you," Conceição fired back. "My daughter made a beautiful, pure, genuine gesture, and you turned it into a mess. People are looking at her as if she were some kind of opportunist. Do you understand what that does to a child?" Roberto lowered his head. "I understand, and I'm sorry. It was never my intention. Intention doesn't pay bills, doesn't fix hearts, and doesn't give my daughter her peace back. Conceição took a step forward. You really want to help? Then go away. Leave us in peace. We've always survived without the help of people like you, and we'll keep surviving. Roberto looked into that woman's eyes and saw a strength that left him speechless. It wasn't just anger. It was protection. It was fierce maternal love. It was the determination of someone who had spent her whole life protecting what she held most precious. And at that moment, Roberto realized something devastating. He had entered that place thinking he had something to offer, that his money, his influence, his resources could make a difference. But the truth was that these people had something he had never had: dignity, community, values that couldn't be bought. And he, with all his fortune and good intentions, was destroying that. "I'll think about what you said," he murmured before walking away. As he walked back to his car, Roberto felt the weight of all his decisions, the pressure from his partners, the division he had caused in the community, the suffering of an innocent girl, all because of a gesture he had interpreted as inspiration, but which was actually just a lesson he wasn't prepared to learn. For the first time since witnessing Luisa give away the chocolate, Roberto seriously considered giving up on everything, going back to his life, following the original plan, building the lucrative development and leaving that community behind, as his partners wanted. It would be easier. It would be simpler. It would be safer. But when he got home that night and looked in the mirror, Roberto didn't recognize the man he saw reflected, and he realized that the greatest battle wasn't against his partners, against the community, or against circumstances. It was against himself. The days following the confrontation with Conceição were the most difficult of Roberto Tavares's adult life. He, who had always known exactly what to do in any business situation, now found himself completely lost. The pressure came from all sides. At the company, the tension was palpable. Marcelo had called a new meeting, this time with the full board. 12 people sat around the mahogany table, all waiting for Roberto to make a final decision on the Nordeste de Amaralina project. "Roberto, the board has voted," Marcelo announced coldly. "By 9 votes to 3, we've decided that either you resume the original project in the next 2 weeks, or we will be forced to re-evaluate your position as CEO of Tavares Empreendimentos." The words fell on Roberto like a sentence. The company his father had built, which he had expanded, was being used as a weapon against him. And the devastating irony was that he understood their logic. From a business point of view, he was being irrational. He was throwing money away. He was hurting profits for a cause that didn't even result in clear benefits. 2 years ago, he would have agreed with them without hesitation. But now there was something stronger than business logic pulsing inside him, something he couldn't ignore even if he wanted to. "I need those 15 days, he said finally. "After that, I will make a final decision." Marcelo nodded, but there was something in his eyes that Roberto recognized, disappointment and maybe pity, as if he were looking at a man who had lost his way and could no longer find the path back. As he left the office, Roberto received a call from his sister, Beatriz, who lived in São Paulo. She was the only close family he had left since their parents had passed. "Roberto, what's happening to you?" she asked as soon as he answered. "What do you mean?" "Marcelo called me. He said you're having an emotional breakdown, that you're making irrational decisions, that you're putting the company at risk." Roberto felt anger rising. He had no right to call you. "Yes, he did, because I'm a shareholder too, and because I care about you." Bea sighed. "Brother, what's really going on?" Roberto stopped in the empty corridor. For a moment he considered pouring it all out, telling her about Luisa, about the chocolate, about the transformation he felt happening inside him. But the words wouldn't come. "I'm just rethinking priorities," he said vaguely. "Priorities? Roberto, you built an empire, you are respected, you have everything. And now you're throwing it all away for what? For a community that doesn't even thank you." "They don't need to thank me, Bea. I have a debt to them." "What debt?" "You don't owe anyone anything. Father built this company honestly. You expanded it with hard work. Nobody owes you anything, and you don't owe anyone." Roberto closed his eyes. How to explain to his sister something he himself could barely understand? How to make her see that there was a debt that wasn't on the accounting books, but weighed more than any number on a spreadsheet? "I know you won't understand," he said softly, "but I need to do this. So you're going to throw everything away? The company, your reputation, everything? See if it's necessary. The silence on the other end of the line was long and painful. I don't recognize you anymore, Bea said finally, her voice choked. The man I'm talking to is not my brother. She hung up before Roberto could answer. He stood in the corridor for long minutes, phone still in hand, feeling the weight of another relationship fragmenting because of his choices. That night, Roberto didn't go home. He drove aimlessly through Salvador, passing through neighborhoods he rarely visited, seeing the city in a way he had never noticed before. He saw people returning from work, tired but resilient. He saw families having dinner in simple houses, with lit windows showing scenes of ordinary life. He saw children playing on the sidewalks, creating joy from nothing, and he wondered when he had lost that. When his life had become so sterile, so focused on numbers and results, that he had forgotten what really mattered. He ended up parking at a viewpoint overlooking the Bay of All Saints. He got out of the car and stood looking at the city lights reflected in the dark water. The salty wind brought smells of food, of life, of humanity. It was there, alone at that viewpoint, that Roberto almost made the decision to give up. It would be so easy to go back to the office tomorrow, tell the partners he was ready to resume the original project, resettle the community families in cheap housing complexes in distant areas, build the lucrative development, move on with life. His company would be saved. His relationship with his sister could be recovered. His reputation in the market would remain intact. He would go back to being the Roberto Tavares everyone knew and respected. And Luisa, the thought came like a punch to the stomach. And the girl who had given her only chocolate without thinking twice. The girl who was now suffering because of him. The girl who represented everything he wasn't, but desperately wanted to be. Roberto leaned against the railing of the viewpoint and for the first time in decades allowed himself to cry. Not silent, discreet tears, but deep sobs that came from a place hidden for so long he had forgotten it existed. He cried for the man he had become, for the father who would probably be disappointed with his ruthless business choices, for the humanity he had sacrificed on the altar of success, for the people he had harmed without ever looking them in the eye. And he cried because for the first time he saw a chance for change, an opportunity to be different, and he was about to waste it because it was easier, more comfortable, safer. When he finally stopped crying, the night was far gone. Roberto picked up his phone and looked at the screen. He had messages from Marcelo demanding an answer, messages from his sister apologizing for the harsh tone but maintaining her position, messages from other partners expressing concern. No messages from anyone in the community. Why would there be? He meant nothing to them. He was just another rich businessman trying to save his own conscience. Roberto was about to start the car and leave when his phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated but answered. Hello? Mr. Roberto. The voice was female, young, nervous. Yes, who is this? It's Luisa. Roberto felt his heart race. Luisa, how did you get my number? I asked Moacir at the bar. He knows a friend who works with you. Her voice trembled. I need to talk to you. Go ahead, I'm listening. No, in person. Can you come here tomorrow morning at the square? Roberto looked at his watch. It was past 11 at night. I can. What time? 7 in the morning, before I go to school. I'll be there, he promised. Thank you, Mr. Roberto, and sorry for calling so late. She hung up before he could ask more questions. Roberto stood looking at the phone, confused and intrigued. Why did Luisa want to talk to him? And why in person? By her voice, it seemed important. It seemed urgent. That night, Roberto didn't sleep. He stayed in the apartment, pacing back and forth, imagining what the girl could want. Part of him hoped it was some kind of opportunity for redemption. Part of him feared it was just another confirmation that he had ruined everything irreparably. When the sun began to rise, Roberto showered, dressed in simple clothes, and drove to Nordeste de Amaralina. He arrived at the square at 6:45. He sat on one of the peeling wooden benches and waited. Luisa arrived punctually at 7. She was in her school uniform, her worn backpack on her shoulders. When she saw him, she walked to the bench and sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. "Thank you for coming," she said, looking at the ground. So you don't have to thank me. What do you need to tell me? Louisa took a deep breath. I wanted you to know something about the chocolate. Roberto grew tense. Go ahead. I'm mad at you, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I'm mad because you turned something beautiful into something ugly. I'm mad because now people look at me differently. I'm mad because I can't do anything anymore without thinking if someone is watching, if someone will judge, if someone will think I have ulterior motives. Roberto felt each word like a blade. I'm so sorry, Louisa. I never wanted that. I know, she said. My mother thinks you're ill-intentioned, but I don't. I think you're just confused, like I'm confused now. She finally looked at him, and Roberto saw tears in the girl's eyes. When I gave that chocolate, I didn't think about anything. I just felt it was right. But now I keep thinking if it wouldn't have been better to keep it, if it wouldn't have been simpler to be selfish. Because being selfish doesn't hurt as much as this. Roberto felt a tightness in his chest. You don't really think that, do you? Louisa wiped away tears with anger. I don't know what I think anymore. You confused everything, and I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know that your actions have consequences, that you can't enter people's lives and mess with everything just because you want to feel better about yourself. Every word was a brutal truth that Roberto needed to hear. But there was one more thing I needed to say, Louisa continued, now with a softer voice. Despite all the confusion, despite everything that happened, I don't regret giving that chocolate, because for a moment, for a single moment, I did something I thought was right, and nobody can take that away from me, not you, not the people who speak ill, not even myself. She stood up, adjusting the backpack on her shoulders. So if you're thinking about giving up on trying to do the right thing just because it's hard, just because people don't understand, just because it seems easier to go back to being who you were, then I think you haven't learned anything. Louisa began to walk away but stopped and looked back. I'm going to keep being who I am, Mr. Roberto, even if it hurts, even if it's hard, because I don't want to become the kind of person who chooses the easy path when the right path is right there in front of them. She left the square, leaving Roberto alone on the bench with her words echoing in his mind. A 12-year-old girl had just given him the most important lesson of his life, and Roberto finally understood what he needed to do. Louisa's words haunted Roberto for the following days like a persistent ghost. I'm going to keep being who I am, even if it hurts. The phrase echoed in his mind when he woke up, when he worked, when he tried to sleep. A 12-year-old girl had more clarity about her values than he, a 46-year-old man who had spent his whole life building concrete empires but forgetting to build character. Roberto knew the deadline given by the partners was running out. There were 5 days left for him to make a final decision, 5 days to choose between the path he had always known and a new, scary, uncertain path. But something had changed after that conversation in the square, something fundamental. For the first time, Roberto was no longer trying to decide what to do. He was trying to understand who he wanted to be. That Saturday, he returned to the community, not with grandiose plans or ready-made solutions, just to observe, to be present, to try to understand what he had always ignored. He sat on a bench in the square, the same one where Louisa had confronted him, and simply watched life happen around him. Children played tag, women talked while washing clothes, men played dominoes in the shade of a mango tree. Simple life, but genuine. Difficult, but real. It was then that he saw Conceição passing by with heavy grocery bags. Roberto hesitated, but stood up and approached. Dona Conceição, can I help with those bags? She stopped and looked at him with suspicion. I don't need your help. I know you don't. But I would like to help anyway. No interest, no agenda, just because it's the right thing to do. Conceição studied his face for long seconds. There was something different there. The polished businessman had given way to a tired, vulnerable, genuinely uncertain man. All right, she said finally, handing him one of the bags. But this doesn't change anything between us. I didn't expect it to. They walked in silence to Conceição's house. Roberto carried the heavy bag, feeling the weight not just of the food, but of the responsibility of being present in someone's real life, not as a benefactor, but as a human being. When they arrived, Conceição took the bag back. Do you want some coffee? The question caught him by surprise. I do. They climbed the worn steps to the small apartment. Roberto entered and saw for the first time where Luisa and Conceição lived. It was tiny. One room that served as a living room as well. A kitchen that barely fit one person. A bathroom with a door that didn't close properly. But it was impeccably clean, organized, cared for with love. Conceição made coffee on the 2-burner stove. Roberto sat on the only available chair, feeling out of place but also strangely humble. "My daughter said she talked to you," Conceição said while stirring the coffee. "She did. She gave me a lesson I needed to hear." Conceição turned and faced him. "She is a special girl, she always has been. Even when we had nothing, she always thought of others. That fills me with pride and fear at the same time." Fear. Conceição served the coffee in 2 chipped cups. Fear because the world is not kind to kind people. The world crushes those with soft hearts, and I don't want my daughter to be crushed. Roberto took the cup, feeling the heat in his hands. "I think she is stronger than we imagine." Conceição sat on the edge of the bed. She took a sip of the bitter coffee. "And you, have you decided what you're going to do?" "Not yet. But your daughter made me realize something. I've spent my whole life making decisions based on what was most profitable, safest, most logical. But I never asked myself if they were the right decisions. And now you're asking? Now I'm trying to learn the difference." They talked for nearly an hour. Not about business or plans, but about life. Conceição told him about her childhood in Feira de Santana, about how she came to Salvador looking for opportunities, about how she raised Luisa alone since the girl's father left, about the dreams she still held despite everything. Roberto found himself sharing things he had never spoken of with anyone, about the pressure of taking over his father's company, about the constant fear of not being good enough, about how success had become a golden prison he didn't know how to escape. When he finally stood up to leave, Conceição accompanied him to the door. "Mr. Roberto," she said, "I still don't fully trust you, but for the first time I think you're starting to understand what really matters." It was Saturday afternoon when Roberto left Conceição's house. He decided to walk through the community for a bit before returning to his car. He passed Sir Joaquim's shop, greeted Dona Marilene, waved to the children playing ball. It was as he turned a corner that he saw her again. Luisa was standing on the sidewalk, looking at something on the street ahead. Roberto followed her gaze and saw a boy, apparently 8 or 9 years old, sitting on the curb. His clothes were dirty, his feet bare, and he was holding his stomach as if he were in pain. Roberto stood still, watching. Luisa was also still, but in her hands there was something Roberto recognized immediately. A small package of biscuits. It wasn't much, but it was something. And by the expression on the girl's face, Roberto knew that package of biscuits probably represented all the snacks she would have for the weekend. Roberto's heart raced. He saw the scene unfold as if he were watching a movie in slow motion. Luisa looked at the package in her hands. She looked at the boy. She looked at the package again. This time there was no one waiting for her to do the right thing. There was no promise to keep. There was no test to pass. She was alone with her conscience and her choice. And this time, unlike the first, she had something to lose. Because now she knew the consequences. She knew that people could judge. She knew they could question her intentions. She knew that even she herself might doubt herself later. But even so, even knowing all that, Luisa walked over to the boy and held out the package of biscuits. "Here, you're hungry, aren't you?" The boy looked at her with wide eyes. He took the package with trembling hands. "Thank you very much, miss." Luisa smiled. "Eat slowly so you don't get sick, okay?" She turned to leave, and that was when she saw Roberto standing there looking at her. Their eyes met, and at that moment something passed between them. It wasn't shame, it wasn't pride, it was just mutual recognition of 2 people who had made difficult choices when it would have been much easier to do nothing. Roberto felt tears streaming down his face and didn't even try to hide them. They weren't tears of sadness, they were of something much deeper. Redemption, transformation, the sudden and overwhelming understanding that he had witnessed something sacred. Luisa hadn't done that expecting anyone to see. She hadn't done it expecting a reward. She hadn't done it to prove anything to anyone. She had done it simply because it was who she was, because as she had told Roberto days before, She didn't want to become the kind of person who chooses the easy path when the right path is right there in front of them. And in that instant, Roberto finally understood what she had tried to teach. It wasn't about making grandiose gestures. It wasn't about solving all problems. It wasn't about being a savior or a hero. It was about remaining true to one's own values even when no one is looking, even when it's difficult, even when it hurts. It was about being consistent, about being genuine, about being human. Luisa began to walk toward him. When she got close, she simply said, "You saw." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "I saw," Roberto replied, his voice choked, "and I learned." "What did you learn?" "That real transformation doesn't come from big gestures or massive investments. It comes from small choices, made repeatedly, even when it's harder than it should be." Luisa nodded. "That's what I wanted you to understand." "I understand now, I finally understand. And what are you going to do with it?" Roberto looked around. He saw the community he had thought about erasing from the map. He saw the people he had almost treated as obstacles. He saw the life he had almost destroyed in the name of profit. "I'm going to do the right thing," he said. "Not my way, the right way." Luisa smiled, and it was the most genuine smile Roberto had ever seen. "You're going to be okay, Mr. Roberto, because now you know the difference." "How do you know?" "Because I see it in your eyes. They're different. Before, when you looked at us, it seemed like you were looking through us. Now you're looking at us for real." Roberto knelt to be at her eye level. "Thank you, Luisa, for not giving up on me, for teaching me something I should have learned a long time ago." "We only teach what we are, Mr. Roberto, and you now have the chance to be who you really want to be." She gave a small wave and ran back home, leaving Roberto there transformed. That night, Roberto did not sleep. But it wasn't the insomnia of anguish. It was the insomnia of certainty. For the first time in weeks, he knew exactly what to do. He picked up his phone and started making calls. The first was to Marcelo. "Marcelo, it's me. We need to talk tomorrow morning. I'm going to present a completely different proposal for the Nordeste de Amaralina land." The second was to Beatriz. "Bea, sorry for calling late, but you said you didn't recognize me anymore, and you were right, because I was no longer the person I should be. But now I am going to be, and I hope one day you understand." The third was to his lawyer. "I need you to prepare documents for a foundation, one that operates with total transparency, with community participation in decisions, and with the goal of real sustainable development, not cosmetic." When the sun rose, Roberto had traced a completely new plan. A plan that dismantled the profitable project and built something different, something that respected people, something that corrected errors instead of just hiding them, something that would cost him his position as CEO, probably a good part of his fortune and certainly his reputation in the business world. But for the first time in decades, Roberto Tavares was at peace, because he had finally learned that a man's true value is measured not by what he builds, but by what he refuses to destroy. And he refused to destroy that community, those people, that girl who had taught him more about humanity than any business mentor ever could. The transformation had begun with a simple gesture, and now finally it was complete. The board meeting on the following Monday was different from all the previous ones. Roberto entered the conference room at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying a folder with documents and an expression no one there recognized. It wasn't the hesitation of the last few weeks. It was absolute determination. Marcelo and the other partners were already seated, awaiting the decision everyone expected. The room was tense, the air heavy with unspoken expectations. "Good morning, everyone," Roberto began, standing at the head of the table. "I know you were expecting an answer regarding the Nordeste de Amaralina project. And I have an answer, but it's not the one you want to hear." He opened the folder and began distributing copies of a document. "I am officially cancelling the demolition and construction project for the luxury residential development. Instead, I am going to create a community development foundation that will work in partnership with local residents for structural improvements that respect the identity and autonomy of the community." The silence was absolute for 3 seconds. Then it exploded in indignant voices. "Roberto, have you lost your mind?" Marcelo shouted. "We're talking about 20 million reais in projected profit." "I am aware of that," Roberto replied calmly. and I am willing to give up that profit in favor of doing what is right. Doing what is right doesn't pay our shareholders, another partner protested. Then maybe we are in the wrong business. The room exploded again. Roberto let them speak, let them shout, let them express all their frustration. When the noise finally subsided, he continued. I know this goes against everything we built as a company. I know you have every right to disagree. Therefore, I am resigning from the position of CEO of Tavares Empreendimentos, effective immediately. The words fell like a bomb. Roberto, Marcelo said, his voice suddenly softer. It doesn't have to come to this. We can negotiate. There is no negotiation possible, Marcelo. I've changed, and you have every right to continue operating as you've always operated. But I can no longer be part of it. Roberto placed his resignation letter on the table, along with his shares in the company. I am selling my stake. The money will fund the foundation I mentioned. You are free to elect a new CEO and follow through with the plans you think are best for the company. But the Nordeste de Amaralina land belongs to me personally, and it will not be sold or developed in the way we planned. He looked around the table, seeing shocked, incredulous faces, some even showing something close to respect. It has been an honor to work with you, but the time has come for me to build something different, something I can look in the mirror and be truly proud of. Roberto left the room without looking back. As he walked down the corridor he had traversed 1,000 times, he felt the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. He was leaving behind financial security, social status, and corporate power. But for the first time in decades, he felt truly free. In the weeks that followed, Roberto worked tirelessly on the creation of the foundation, but this time he didn't make decisions alone. He called a series of meetings with the Nordeste de Amaralina Residents Association, not to present ready-made solutions, but to listen, to learn, to understand what they really needed. Conceição was elected president of the foundation's community council. At first, she accepted with reluctance, still suspicious. But gradually, seeing Roberto keep every promise, seeing him work side by side with the residents, seeing him learn humility where there was previously arrogance, she began to believe the change was real. The foundation didn't bring instant or miraculous changes. Instead, it worked on sustainable projects, developed in partnership with the residents, a vocational training program that Conceição helped design, a sewing cooperative that employed the women of the community, a technical civil construction course that prepared young people for the job market. It wasn't charity. It was an investment in autonomy. It was respect for dignity. It was a recognition that those people didn't need to be saved. They needed fair opportunities. 6 months after the foundation was created, Conceição got a steady job as an instructor in the vocational training program. Not as a favor from Roberto, but by her own merit. Her salary was dignified, her working hours were humane, and for the first time in years she was able to plan for the future, without living only for the present. When she received her first paycheck, Conceição arrived home and placed the envelope on the table. Luisa was doing her homework and looked up. "Mom, we did it," Luisa said, her eyes shining. Conceição hugged her daughter, feeling tears flow. "We've always done it, my daughter, but now we're doing it in a way that makes us look in the mirror and be proud." The community also changed. The divisions that had formed in the early months began to heal. People saw that Roberto wasn't there to buy consciences or create dependencies. He was there to correct mistakes, learn from them, and build something genuinely better. Donna Noza, who had been one of Luisa's harshest critics, sought the girl out one Saturday afternoon. "Luisa, I need to apologize to you," she said, her voice trembling. "I judged you wrongly. I said things that weren't true, and I'm ashamed of that." Luisa smiled with the kindness she had never lost, even in the most difficult moments. "It's all right, Donna Noza. You were afraid. I understand." "You are a special girl, Luisa. Don't let this world take that away from you." "I won't," the girl promised. Roberto remained involved with the foundation, but never as a central figure. He learned to work behind the scenes, to support without suffocating, to invest without controlling. He learned that true transformation doesn't happen from the top down, but from the inside out. His relationship with his sister Beatrice took time to recover. She visited Salvador 6 months after his resignation, still skeptical of his choices. Roberto took her to see the community. He introduced her to Conceição, to Luisa, and to the people who were part of the foundation. He showed her not grandiose works or impressive constructions, but subtle and profound changes. Smiles where there was previously suspicion, hope where there was previously resignation, autonomy where there was previously dependence. At the end of the visit, while they were having coffee at Conceição's house, Beatriz looked at her brother with tears in her eyes. "I was wrong," she admitted. "You didn't lose anything. You found something I didn't even know existed." "What?" "Real purpose. The kind that doesn't come from conquering things, but from serving people." On a sunny Sunday, a year after that first meeting in the square, Roberto was helping paint the facade of the local school when he saw Luisa approaching. The girl was 13 now, a bit taller, but with the same kind eyes and the same genuine smile. "Mr. Roberto, can I talk to you?" "Of course, Luisa, always." They walked to the square and sat on the bench that had become a kind of sacred place for both of them. "I wanted to say thank you," she began, "not for the things you did for the community, but for having learned." Roberto smiled. "I'm the one who should thank you. You taught me more than I managed to teach myself in 46 years. Luisa was silent for a moment. "Do you know what I learned from all this?" "Tell me." "That sometimes we do the right thing and the world doesn't reward us right away. Sometimes it even punishes us, but the reward isn't in what comes from the outside. It's in what we become on the inside." Roberto felt a lump in his throat. "At 13, you already understand what most people take a lifetime to learn." Luisa shrugged. "I had a good teacher. My mother always said we can't control what happens to us, but we can control who we are when things happen." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching life happen around them. Children playing, adults talking, the community living, not just surviving. "You know, Luisa," Roberto said finally, "I spent my whole life thinking transformation was about building big things, tall buildings, profitable developments, powerful companies. But you showed me that real transformation begins with a simple choice. A small decision to do the right thing even when it's hard." "And you made that choice," Luisa said, "even losing so much." "I didn't lose anything that really mattered. In fact, I gained everything that was always missing." "What?" "Humanity." They smiled at each other, two people from completely different worlds, united by the same fundamental understanding of what really matters in life. As the sun set over Salvador, painting the sky orange and pink, Roberto Tavares looked around the community he had almost destroyed and saw not what could have been in terms of profit, but what it had become in terms of human value. He saw families prospering with dignity. He saw children dreaming of futures that previously seemed impossible. He saw a community that was not erased or replaced, but strengthened and respected. And he saw a 13-year-old girl who, with a single gesture of genuine generosity, had triggered a chain of transformations that changed not just a community, but the soul of a man who thought he was beyond redemption. The story began with a chocolate. A single chocolate that was worth less than any transaction Roberto had ever made. But that simple gesture carried a value that no money in the world could buy. It carried the power to change hearts, to transform lives, to prove that true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we are willing to share. And so, in that community in the heart of Salvador, the most important lesson of all echoed silently in the daily actions of ordinary people making extraordinary choices. The lesson that a gesture doesn't need to solve everything, to change everything. That kindness is not weakness, it is courage. That real transformation happens not when we decide to save others, but when we allow others to save us. Roberto looked at Luisa one last time before she said goodbye and went home. And in that look, there was deep gratitude for a girl who, without knowing it, had saved not just his soul, but shown him that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be all along. Night fell over the community, bringing with it the promise of a new day, and in every home, in every heart, in every choice made with integrity, lived the proof that the greatest transformative power in the world is not in the hands of the powerful. It is in the hands of those who, even having little, choose to share. It is in the hearts of those who, even when no one is looking, do what is right. It is in the soul of those who understand that our true measure is not what we conquer for ourselves, but what we are willing to give to others. And all of this began with a girl, a chocolate, and the simple but profound decision to be above all human. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Luisa, Conceição, and Roberto has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it Luisa's initial gesture? Roberto's transformation? Conceição's strength? Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that small actions can generate great changes. Your participation keeps this chain of stories alive, stories that inspire, move, and transform. We'll wait for you in the next episode with another narrative that